Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. J'ouvre maintenant la séance.
I'd like to call the meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 42 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Accounts. Pursuant to Standing Order 1083G, the committee is meeting today in relation to its study of Report 3, the potential of hydrogen to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, 2022, reports 1 to 5 of the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development. The witness has passed his sound and internet connectivity test.
I'd like to welcome our guest. Office of the Officer General. We have Martin Dompierre, Assistant Auditor General, in replacement of the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development, Jerry DeMarco. We have Philip Legoff, Principal. Good to see you both. From the Department of Natural Resources, John Hannaford, Deputy Minister. Sebastian Labelle, Director General Clean Fuels Branch. And from the Department of the Environment, Christine Hogan, hello, Deputy Minister. Douglas Nevison, Assistant Deputy Minister, Climate Change Branch. And by video conference, we have Derek Hermanitz, Director General, Economic Analysis Directorate, Strategic Policy Branch. And I believe it is Mr. Dompierre. We'll be making the opening remark for 5 minutes. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, thank you for this opportunity to discuss our report on hydrogen's potential to reduce green gas emissions, which was tabled in Parliament on April 26, 2022. I would like to acknowledge that this hearing is taking place on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. With me today is Philip Legoff, the principal responsible for this audit. The potential role hydrogen could play in net zero energy systems and decarbonization is gaining significant global interest. Hydrogen can be used to drive down emissions where electrification is not technically or economically feasible, such as in energy-intensive industries. However, hydrogen's potential for decarbonization depends on how the hydrogen is produced and used. For this audit, we wanted to know whether Environment and Climate Change Canada and Natural Resources Canada comprehensively assess the role that hydrogen should play as a pathway to reach Canada's climate commitments. Overall, we found that the two departments had different approaches to assessing the role of hydrogen should play in reducing greenhouse gas emission. Environment and Climate Change Canada is expected to achieve 15 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent emission reduction in 2030, whereas Natural Resource Canada projected up to 45 megatons by 2030. To assess the demand of hydrogen, Environment and Climate Change Canada assumed a blending mandate for hydrogen and natural gases that was not based on any existing policy at the provincial or federal level. In addition, this approach was uneconomical based on the current trend of carbon pricing. Pour sa part, Ressources Naturelles Canada.
For its part, Natural Resources Canada favored a transformative scenario that assumed the adoption of aggressive and sometimes non-existent policies along with ambitious uptake of new technology. It's important that Environment and Climate Change Canada and other federal departments adopt a standard framework to estimate the emission impacts of proposed policies, clean technologies and fuels. Generally, Environment and Climate Change Canada didn't distinguish existing policies and measures from those that had not yet been announced or implemented. We found that Environment and Climate Change Canada's climate plan, that was in effect at the time of the audit, was based on measures that had sometimes not been implemented and that relied on some policies that did not have the necessary legislative and financial support. Environment and Climate Change Canada would benefit from a stronger framework for peer review, public scrutiny, and quality assurance and control in its modeling exercises. This is important because it would improve the quality and transparency of and the trust in the Department's climate change modeling in future emission reduction plans. Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening remarks. We are pleased to answer any questions that committee members may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will turn now to, I think, Ms. Hogan. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please. Thank you.
Okay, merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for inviting Environment and Climate Change Canada to participate in your committee. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to discuss the Department's response to Report 3 of the Spring 2022 Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development Reports. Before I begin, I too would like to note that we are gathered today on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. The Department welcomes the Commissioner's report on the potential of hydrogen to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Addressed to the Department, and as our action plan shows, Environment and Climate Change Canada is acting upon them. Let me highlight 2 primary points. First, I can provide some context regarding how Environment and Climate Change Canada approached its modelling work. And second, I would like to emphasize that despite differences that may exist between Environment and Climate Change Canada and NRCan's approaches, Environment and Climate Change Canada has the same overall assessment of the potential for hydrogen to play as a clean fuel and industrial feedstock that both helps the Canadian economy decarbonize and that represents an important economic diversification opportunity for the Canadian economy. On the modelling question, Environment and Climate Change Canada and Natural Resources Canada conducted complementary but quite different modelling exercises. The objectives, analytical approaches, and scope differed. I will defer to Natural Resources Canada to speak to the analysis developed for their hydrogen strategy. For our part, Environment and Climate Change Canada's modelling was about the overall impact of the full suite of measures in the December 2020 Strengthened Climate Plan, and was not intended to provide a disaggregated impact of any specific set of measures or targeted activities, including measures related specifically to hydrogen. In addition, although our modelling included a proxy for the hydrogen strategy that was still under development at that time, that proxy on its own was not intended to estimate a full role hydrogen could play in reducing emissions. Since then, of course, since late 2020, the government has announced a number of initiatives to encourage the increased production and use of clean hydrogen. The 2030 emission reduction plan, for example, released at the end of March this year, references a number of hydrogen-related initiatives. The clean fuel regulations, finalized in July 2022, will reduce emissions by requiring gasoline and diesel to become less polluting over time. They will also drive innovation in clean technology and will increase demand for low-carbon energy, including biofuels and hydrogen. The Natural Resources Canada Clean Fuels Fund will help producers by investing to de-risk the capital investment required to build new or expand existing clean fuel production facilities, and this will help grow domestic production capacity for clean fuels, including clean hydrogen. The Government of Canada is also supporting the production and use of clean hydrogen through support for projects funded under the Net Zero Accelerator Initiative. And finally, I would highlight that in Budget 2022, the government did commit to establish an investment tax credit to support investments in such things as clean hydrogen production. Working across the government with departments, particularly our partners at Natural Resources Canada, ISED and Finance Canada, Environment and Climate Change Canada will continue to build on and improve such initiatives as we move forward with the government's climate change agenda. In closing, the department will consider the Commissioner's observations as we move forward on the 2030 emissions reduction plan and all subsequent climate policies in the coming months and years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Hogan. Appreciate your time. Mr. Hannaford, you have the floor now for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'm also honored to be joining the committee from the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples. Mr. Chair, the Commissioner's report highlighted hydrogen's essential role in our future, and my department fully agrees. And much has happened since the report's release. Global urgency on energy security, the energy transition, and the climate imperative have cemented hydrogen's critical role in meeting domestic and global energy needs. This urgency in Canada's climate commitments make Canada a partner of choice to supply clean hydrogen. Globally, hydrogen investments are expanding. Both the United States' Inflation Reduction Act and the EU's Green Deal included significant investments in hydrogen. Canada is also growing its hydrogen sector through budgets 2021 and 2022 and in the fall economic statement. For example, the $1.5 billion Clean Fuels Fund supports new production capacity for clean fuels. In fact, in early November, $800 million from this fund went to support 60 projects, including several hydrogen facilities. The Strategic Innovation Fund's Net Zero Accelerator recently announced $300 million towards a $1.6 billion project that produces and liquefies hydrogen in Alberta and will create 230 jobs. A clean hydrogen investment tax credit, which will provide a refundable credit of up to 40%. And then there's the $15 billion Canadian Growth Fund, which focuses on 4 areas, including hydrogen, providing different sorts of fiscal support. And as a last example, the Canada Infrastructure Bank's mandate was expanded to include clean hydrogen production, transportation, and distribution. Mr. Chair, these initiatives will solidify Canada's investments in the private sector and attract foreign investors. As you may have seen, more than 10 multi-billion dollar hydrogen projects were highlighted at the Atlantic Hydrogen Expo in August. And at the same time, the government committed to a Canada-Germany Hydrogen Alliance. As our action plan shows, NRCan is acting on the recommendations outlined in Report Number 3 from the Commissioner. We're already updating our hydrogen modeling to incorporate new economic and technical data. When we developed the hydrogen strategy, we spoke to over 1,500 public and private representatives. We're now planning more workshops with them, as well as a workshop with provinces and territories to discuss modeling results. We're also working on our first biennial report, showcasing key data related to hydrogen production, end uses, investments, jobs, and exports. It will track progress on the strategy's recommendations, document results, and identify new priority areas for the near term. Hydrogen is also one of the many economic opportunities being discussed in the Regional Energy and Resource Tables. Launched in June, the tables provide an opportunity to work with provinces, territories, Indigenous groups, industry, workers, and experts to ensure that each region is well positioned to use their unique local resources to thrive economically in the low-carbon future. I now want to turn to the audit's suggestion that NRCan overestimated hydrogen's potential in the hydrogen strategy. The strategy was meant as a call to action. To that end, it needed to show the full potential of hydrogen in multiple sectors and the full slate of actions that could be taken by governments and the private sector to unlock this potential. The strategy was meant to show what could happen, first, if only incremental actions were taken, and second, if significant actions were taken across the economy. In these scenarios, 2030 emissions reductions range from 22 to 45 megatons, in line with those estimated by ECCC's model, which only looked at one use of hydrogen. Mr. Chair, the future is promising for Canadian hydrogen. We're already known as a clean energy leader. We've got decades of experience, a skilled workforce, and existing infrastructure that includes a vast pipeline network. We also have the feedstocks, including hydroelectricity, wind, and natural gas, to produce clean hydrogen in several provinces. The government is committed to unlocking hydrogen's potential to ensure Canada's economic and climate success. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you all very, very much. We'll now turn to our first round. Mr. McCauley, who's joining us virtually, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Mr. Chair, thanks very much. Witnesses, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. To the AG's office, do we know how much the government has spent so far on hydrogen, on the strategy, based on what seems to be rather faulty projections?
I'm going to ask Monsieur Le Goff to respond. I don't believe we have that information in the report, but I'll ask Monsieur Le Goff to provide a response.
Mr. Chair, this is correct. We don't have this information.
Would it be available to you? You can get back to us?
I think the departments will be better positioned to provide this information.
Okay. Well, the departments, then, if you could provide that to us. In your opening statement, you note that the department used different approaches to assessing hydrogen and its use in reducing GHG. They're rather wildly different projections. Did the departments explain to you how they came up with such widely different methodology, or used such widely different methodology in coming up with these numbers?
Mr. President, yes, they explained to us. We saw the modeling and we look at different hypotheses that were used to achieve these numbers.
Is there a reason why there would not be just one way to project, or one projection or one calculation to use? It seems very odd that the same government is using numbers that are 300% apart on GHG rejections.
We would have expected that the both departments would have a coordinated approach in terms of determining the emission reduction. As we mentioned in the report, one department indicated that the reduction would be 15 megatons of emission versus 45 megatons of emission. So definitely a coordinated approach would have been necessary.
Yeah, one would have thought, anyways. Do you accept Natural Resources' opening statement that they seem to be making an excuse of, well, it was just a call to action? They seem to be kind of excusing a lot of the rather damning comments in your report about their numbers, how they came up with the numbers.
So thank you for the question, Mr. President. So basically, we looked at a number of assumptions. As we say in the report, some of these assumptions were overestimated and were based on non-existent policies. The report provides numerous numbers of example. As an example, there was an assumption for very low-cost electricity by provinces, whereas the assumption was a $40 megawatt hour across all provinces, whereas the observed price in 2020, which ranged between $52 and $124 per megawatt. So definitely, some of these assumptions were quite off to what was the market sort of value of some of those electricity costs.
Is it acceptable in any accounting practice or any general practice to base projections on what I'm going to call dishonest, perhaps, projections or calculations? Basing it on policy that hasn't been developed or technology that hasn't been developed?
I would say we looked at the modeling and the assumptions and I'm not in a position to determine if it was dishonest by both departments, but we definitely looked at those assumptions and trying to understand how they came up with these emission reductions.
Thanks. Based on the cost projections in 3.1, does Canada reasonably have the ability to replace current energy use with hydrogen? And I stress the word reasonably.
Mr. Ricali, who's that question directed to?
To the AG still.
Mr. Chair, we are concerned that Canada will need an incredible amount of energy to provide the amount of hydrogen that is mentioned in the report.
Yeah, at either an incredible cost or incredible increase in GHG. Has there been an analysis done by any department you're aware of to the cost to the economy and the GDP and jobs if we replace current energy with hydrogen at the higher cost mentioned in your report?
Ask Mr. Legoff to respond to that question.
Yes, please.
Well, in the strategy, and you can, the Department of Natural Resources can talk about it. There's an estimation about the economic impact of hydrogen, what hydrogen will have in terms of jobs and GDP.
Jerry DeMarco commented, and I'm taking this out of a news briefing, that due to the high cost of hydrogen, he's expressing doubts about whether hydrogen can play any sort, not a role, but any sort of meaningful role, because lack of infrastructure, pipelines, and the costs. Do you agree with that? And do you believe that the two departments with us today are accepting that comment from Mr. DeMarco?
So I do agree with Mr. DeMarco's conclusion on what he stated. I would ask the department if they do agree with this, Mr. DeMarco said.
Right. Well, I think that's my time, and we'll get back to them at 10.
Is your time. One thing, Mr. McCauley, you or one of your colleagues should come back to is that Mr. Legoff said on the question for departmental spending, the departments would be better placed to answer that. They haven't answered that, and I think someone needs to put that question to them, and if they can provide that information. I don't think it's appropriate just to say provide the information until we know if it can be provided. Just to be fair to the departments, that we're not expecting something from them that they're either not sure exactly what's being requested or they're not able to provide. So I leave that for you to come back to at another round. Turning now to Mr. Dong, I'm very pleased to see you. Yep. For a second, I thought you were not going to make it here today, and
no, I'm here.
Over to you for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I want to thank all the department officials and also officials from AG's office for coming today. My question is towards NRCan. Very quickly, if you can give us an overview on the state of the technology and in terms of its application, because you mentioned in your opening remarks there were significant investment already in place both by the public sector and the private sector. So please tell us a little bit about that.
Mr. Chair, the production of hydrogen is actually something that's been part of our energy mix or industrial mix for a long time. We have been producing hydrogen in a variety of different ways through different technologies. What has changed recently is the degree of demand as some of the new technologies have come on board to create hydrogen both through electrolysis, and that's through conversion of water into hydrogen, and through the reform of natural gas, which essentially uses very high heat to separate out the hydrogen from the carbon and methane. That process, or those two processes, combined with carbon capture and storage, can lead to quite substantial supplies of very low carbon fuel, which can be applied in a number of different ways. And Canada has been a leader with respect to the development of such technologies as hydrogen cells, which can convert that hydrogen then into electricity and can be used as a source of power in automobiles, in heavy and medium weight vehicles, and in other applications such as steel production. And so,
you used the word.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
So the application of that hydrogen technology is being advanced through a variety of different means around the world, and there is an increasing demand then for hydrogen as a fuel, as a clean fuel, that we are seeing in a number of different ways. You know, I mentioned in my opening statement the arrangement that we have reached with Germany. We have also been in conversations with other key partners such as Korea and Japan and the United States about the application of hydrogen as a clean fuel. And I would say that this is, as I also mentioned in my opening statement, this is something that is relevant across the country. And so as we think about the regional tables and as we are trying to study and identify with each province and territory areas where we have a strategic advantage that we can use to move towards a cleaner carbon future.
Okay, I got very limited time. I want to get a couple of questions saying that. So you used the word demand twice. So, you know, can we say that the technology is mature enough or is very close to the stage of vast commercialization to replace use of fossil fuel or even potential, not so environmentally friendly way to produce electricity? Can we say that?
It is increasing. The technology is advancing and demand is increasing, and such things as the crisis in Europe are actually advancing this even faster.
So as the technology grows, along the way, does it pose any risk to sufficiency of energy supply in Canada?
Well, again, there are a couple pathways to hydrogen. There are actually several, but the two principal ones present different sorts of challenges. If you're using electricity to, through electrolysis, separate water, then you need sufficient energy supply in order for that to happen. And similarly, you need to think about, in the conversion of natural gas, how energy is supplied in order to create the heat that would generate the separation of the molecules. But those are things that then become relevant as we think about some of the challenges of electrification and some of the technologies that are available there.
Okay. And does it pose a and can overestimate the emission reduction potential of hydrogen? I just want to give you a chance to answer this question. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, we were engaged in a very specific exercise, which was to identify the full potential of hydrogen at a point in time. And that exercise arrived at the figures that we've been discussing. That was intended as a call to action. It was not intended as a sort of an analysis other than as a sort of full potential of the technology. And we continue to refine this. You know, we have a series of committees that we have stood up that are aiming to draw off of the wisdom of the private sector and other forms of experts and with the provinces and the territories to make sure that we better understand this technology as it evolves and its potential. That will result in an update report next year, which will give our most recent picture as to what the potential of the technology is.
In your opening remarks, you named a few international players as being investing heavily into hydrogen technology. What's the risk for not doing anything on this technology or not to enhance the or incentivize the private investment into that technology in Canada? What's the risk?
The risk is being left behind. There is substantial investment, as you mentioned, that is happening internationally. We have strategic potential here. These are, any sorts of decisions with respect to this take time in order to come to fruition. And so,
what do you mean by left behind? Is it like a job loss?
And that is the time. I'm afraid you'll have to come back to that. Mr. Trudel, à votre tour, 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Go ahead, Mr. Trudel. You have 6 minutes. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. This is a very important issue we're discussing today. A few days ago, we were talking about the housing crisis. That is serious. Now we're looking at the environmental crisis. It's a serious issue as well. Things aren't going all that well here in Canada in our fight against climate change. We're the only G7 country where emissions have gone up since 2015, since the Paris Agreement, since the Liberals took power, so that's quite something. Now we hear a lot of people talking about speeches, the Liberal ministers and environmentalists, etc., but Canada has never respected any signature on these agreements. On the pacts or agreements that were signed, we've never respected any targets. We've issued targets but never met them. We're the second G20 country in investments in fossil fuels, and that's something to note as well. We're the worst in the G20 in terms of emissions per capita. So we can't say that it's going well here in Canada. How is it? So this is my question for Mr. Harford from the department. So how is it then? What isn't working? Now, it's not a miracle here. How is it that in Canada that we have all these lovely promises, these commitments and whatnot? There are international agreements, the COP, etc. How is it that we're lagging behind and we can't reduce our greenhouse gas emissions? What's happening here?
Mr. Chair, we are taking very substantial steps to address the emissions that are just an aspect of our economy and our society. The emissions reduction plan that was released this spring is amongst the most ambitious and most detailed internationally to both understand the challenges that we face and to provide pathways as to how we will be pursuing those. Hydrogen can play a role in this because hydrogen is a clean fuel, and as we think about the investments we're making through the mechanisms that I mentioned earlier, we have an opportunity to make inroads not only for Canada to meet our own objectives, but also to provide a clean fuel internationally and to continue our role as an energy supplier.
Okay. Mais si on met de côté l'hydrogène.
But if we set aside hydrogen, then what are these robust measures that will, in the years to come, reduce our greenhouse gas emissions? Mr. Hannaford.
Mr. Chair, there are a number of measures that have been announced, both in conjunction with the emissions reduction plan and through successive budgets, which are intended to foster innovation in this area. We've mentioned the investment tax credit that's been put in place with respect to the carbon capture and storage technologies. We talked about investment tax credits that are also available for clean energy and hydrogen. These are all incentives towards substantial reductions in our emissions over time. We're also taking other measures, which my colleagues at Environment would be better placed to discuss on a regulatory side to change very significantly the way that we do business and to meet the overall objectives that we have been setting.
Le Canada avait annoncé
Canada had announced that we were going to be reducing emissions, and I think other countries as well had made an announcement. I think the head of the UN said that it was a crime to keep bringing oil out of the ground. It's a crime against humanity, and we have to stop investing in fossil fuels. But Canada committed to stopping that in 2023, stop putting an end to with public funding in that area. But we have seen that there's some $8.5 billion in investments in the past years in fossil fuels. Now, 2023 is in 28 days. Is it realistic to think that by 2023, Canada won't invest a cent in fossil fuels? Ms. Hogan, perhaps?
Thank you. Thank you. Merci beaucoup pour votre question.
Well, thank you very much for your question.
Issue, I think the commitment that Canada has made around eliminating inefficient fossil fuel subsidies is been well communicated with the phase out next year in 2023, as you mentioned, and we are working towards that end. Mm-hmm.
Okay, mais ma question c'est, est-ce que c'est vraiment...
But my question is it realistic to think that we're going to meet that objective as of January 1st, 28 days from now, that Canada won't be investing a single cent, not a penny in fossil fuels?
I think the response, Mr. Chair, is that in 2023, I don't think it was as of January 1st, 2023, but I mean, that is the objective. The government has made that clear and on numerous occasions. It's articulated in our emission reduction strategy and has been reiterated domestically and internationally.
D'accord. Merci beaucoup. J'aimerais, M. Hannaford.
Well, thank you. Mr. Hannaford, now I would like to talk about some companies in BC that are capturing carbon. They've got some kind of a vacuum system where they draw it in, and they are burying the carbon. There's another one. There's some kind of a filter for large industries. So they have different systems. And there are a lot of people saying that it's dangerous because we're not eliminating it. We're just simply burying it under the ground. And if there were some kind of an incident... sorry, Mr. Trudel, your time is up. You'll be able to come back later.
Pardon me, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being with us today on this important work. I want to thank the Office of the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development for being with us as well. In previous appearances at this committee, the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development actually delivered a scathing audit about Canada's failure to achieve its climate targets. And I'm certain the Auditor General's Office and the Commissioner of the Environment will remember this. I and many Canadians have a serious lack of trust in the emissions plans as we see results like the ones we're seeing from the emissions reductions audit that we're reviewing today. You can imagine how incredibly important it is that at a time like now, that we actually try to reinforce principles that unite Canadians and have confidence in structures, in particular our ministries, when doing the work of trying to deliver the results that so many Canadians are relying on as we face a really catastrophic situation, which is the effects of climate change. So I'm concerned that the Environment and Climate Change Canada is relying on some very unrealistic assumptions that's pointed out in the audit about how these policies actually play out on the ground. And as evidence to this, you can turn to Exhibit 3.5, paragraph 3.6. It makes quite explicit in that statement, which I'll read now, quote, Environment and Climate Change Canada provided us with a comprehensive list of assumptions. For both cases, we found that the department relied on some inflated and overly confident assumptions when modeling measures to reach the 30% emission reduction target for 2030. This is something I want the members who are with us today to take quite serious in the fact that it will have a detrimental effect to building confidence for the outcomes that Canadians truly need. And so there's a list of assumptions and facts I can go through, and it's under the same exhibit, which is 3.5 under the unrealistic assumptions. Some of these assumptions include an increase starting in 2022 in shell elements of the building structure, such as walls, windows, etc., energy efficiency of all buildings by a target of 2% each year from residential and 2.5% from commercial. The facts are that these levels would levels of increase would require major retrofits in the industry between 1990 and 2017. Overall energy efficiencies, lighting, heating, shell appliances for the residential sector improved an average of 1.6% per year, and the commercial and institutional sectors by just 0.7%. And so you can see there's a huge gap there. And that's the situation that I think Canadians want an explanation for. And we need to actually find ways to actually build confidence to the solutions you're going to be offering today. So how can Canadians, my question now, how can Canadians have confidence in Environment Canada's modeling when the gap between assumptions and facts are so massively different? Environment Canada, please.
I want to thank you for that question, and would like to start by reassuring people that Environment and Climate Change Canada's modelling processes are robust, reliable, and they're in line with international guidelines and standards. The emission modelling of Canada's climate plans, and when assessing progress towards the country's emission reduction targets, ECC follows international guidelines that are established for reporting on progress to targets. What we do in these instances, as we did with the Strengthened Climate Plan and again in the emission reduction strategy plan that was released in March, Environment Canada models a package of measures together to estimate the GHG reductions associated with all of the measures contained in the plans. And this is consistent with the existing UNCCC, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change reporting guidelines.
I'll have to just interrupt you there, just because there's a limitation of time.
Yeah.
And so directly speaking, the assumptions you're using include an assumption that your modeling includes assumptions that are, for example, under that same exhibit 3.5, which states an increased sales shares in line with the California policy on zero-emission heavy-duty vehicles. While here in Canada, no such policy exists. So how can you be confident in the results of the modeling when the assumption is that there's going to be policies that just don't exist right now?
Maybe I'm going to invite my colleague, the Director General of our Economic Analysis Division, to comment and respond to that specific question.
Please.
Sure. So the UNFCCC accounting framework and guidelines allow for two different scenarios, and this is how Canada approaches the modeling. One is the reference case scenario, and that includes policies that are legislated, implemented, or funded. That's the baseline analysis.
That's the realistic one.
Do. That's as defined by the UNFCCC. That's, yes, funded, legislated, implemented. And then the UNFCCC also allows for an additional measures case. And that is where countries can estimate the impacts of policies that have been announced, but are not yet fully funded or implemented.
Well, then why would the department rely on this modeling, this form of modeling, to communicate its objectives with Canadians when the real model exists? And I think that's what the Auditor General is pointing out, is the fact that the government is relying on policies that are, in this instance, utilizing unrealistic and largely huge assumptions that we're communicating to Canadians. And when we do that, we don't see those outcomes, right?
We publish both the reference case and the additional measures case. The initial measures case is the one that we use to show progress to the target.
Or in this case,
and that is the time, I'm afraid, Mr. Desjardins. Thank you very much. Turning to our next round, Mr. Cram, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here this afternoon. The audit makes many references to the document titled A Healthy Environment and a Healthy Economy. And this document was released December of 2020. And I remember it was important enough to warrant a press conference by the Prime Minister himself. So my question is, who wrote this document?
This is a Government of Canada document released by Environment and Climate Change Canada, but obviously reflecting the whole of government approach and strategy for climate change, and it's referred to as the Strengthened Climate Plan.
Yes, and I realize it says Environment and Climate Change Canada on the cover, but how did we get to this point? It's like, does the document come from the PMO and then the cover gets slapped on top, or how does the whole contents of the document come together?
Well, I think, Mr. Chair, I would simply say that this is consistent with most government plans or all government plans that you see released publicly in this way. They are a function of considerable policy work and decision making, and ultimately the decision of the Government of Canada and the Minister of Environment.
Okay, now if we come back to the audit document, if we go to page 23, paragraph 3.62, I would like to read a quote from about halfway through the paragraph. It says, quote, "Moreover, departmental officials," referring to Environment and Climate Change Canada officials, "departmental officials told us it is not in the purview of Environment and Climate Change Canada's modeling group to develop cost-effective decarbonization pathways. According to the department, this responsibility is disseminated across several federal organizations." So I was wondering if someone could shed some light on how that works. So that there seems to be a lot of different input into coming up with the document, but no one seems to be responsible for coming up with the pathways that are actually feasible. Can anyone speak to that?
I can make an attempt, Mr. Chair. So the Strengthened Climate Plan and the emission reduction plan that followed suit in March are extremely comprehensive. They cover multitude of sectors of the economy, and therefore are products of a lot of detailed work done internally within departments and then worked up collectively in a whole of government way across. So we obviously at Environment and Climate Change Canada work very closely with our partner departments, whether that would be transportation in the transportation sector, natural resources on energy and natural resource issues, and the like. And there are a lot of detailed efforts that go into then compiling those plans and telling a whole of government story. And that may be sufficient for the moment, but Derek Hermanantz may also be able to elaborate on more of the mechanics.
No, I think that's right, Deputy. The projections are done, to represent the government's existing policies. That's done in coordination with other federal departments, as the Deputy said, Agriculture, Natural Resources Canada, Transportation. And then the end result is that Environment Climate Change Canada models the whole package and estimates what the global impacts will be on emissions reductions for Canada.
Okay, so which of these several federal organizations are responsible for developing the cost-effective decarbonization pathways?
I'm not sure exactly what the commissioner is referring to there, but the whole of government is responsible for developing the policy analysis and projections that go into the climate plans. And it's ECCC that is the coordinator of that process.
So if it's a whole of government approach, would it be safe to say that you have to go all the way up to the Prime Minister then? For accountability as to who is responsible for developing the cost-effective decarbonization pathways?
Yes, the document has to go through approval processes I'll ask my deputy to respond directly to that.
Well, I would comment that the ultimately, yes, these are approved as Government of Canada documents and plans, and you know, but I think the specific work that happens on the modeling and the individual data that's collected, of course, is something that is typically handled at the officials level.
And thank you, Mr. Cram. That is all your time. Ms. Shanahan, you have the floor for 5 minutes. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. And I too would like to thank the witnesses for being here on this very important topic. And certainly it's an educational topic for me. I'd like to take up where my colleague left off on the risk of being left behind. I too am trying to understand the business case for hydrogen. I'm trying to understand the equation between amount of investment and the actual, cost benefit of using hydrogen. Mr. Hannaford, can I hear you on that?
Mr. Chair, the potential here is manifold. We certainly have domestic applications of hydrogen that we are already seeing develop. And I mentioned the transportation opportunities, but there are heavy industry opportunities as well. And, you know, I think as the technology continues to develop, I noted that there were a couple of feedstocks for hydrogen. The ability to create clean hydrogen, which is very, very low carbon from natural gas, is increasingly, the technology has advanced dramatically over the course of the last period of time. And so I think we have domestic applications that are evolving and are increasingly real, and we have international opportunities which are likewise evolving and increasingly real. And the degree to which we are being approached by partners and critical partners is one of the sort of indications of that.
But I do hear the concerns, Mr. Hannaford, of my other colleagues around just how much money is being invested, both public sector and private sector. So is there a sweet spot that we can anticipate in the near future? Has there been progress, in other words, in your measurement of the potential of this technology?
Mr. Chair, as I mentioned, there have been a series of conversations that have been happening over the course of the last period of time, which increase our knowledge collectively with respect to hydrogen and its potential. And I would say that we are seeing progress, quite substantial progress. And as I also mentioned, this is partially driven by, obviously, our climate objectives and the climate crisis is a critical aspect of this, but geopolitics is another. As we talk about energy security and we talk about the experience that our European friends are going through as a result of the crisis in Ukraine, issues around diversification of energy supply, but also the different sorts of fuels that are being considered and the different sorts of energy generation that are being considered are accelerating in part because of just the realities that our friends are confronting.
Well, that is interesting, Mr. Hannaford. I'm a resident here in Quebec, and we benefit, of course, from a terrifically efficient and cost-effective electricity system. But can you talk to us then about hydrogen's comparative advantage to electricity in powering our transportation?
Well, I think various parts of the country are going to have various advantages with respect to hydrogen. I mentioned earlier the work that we are doing with the provinces and territories through the regional tables, and that's partially to make sure that we are being as focused as we can be on specific advantages that each of the regions have. But in Quebec, where there is the generation of hydrogen, possible generation of hydrogen through clean electricity and separation of water molecules, one of the benefits of hydrogen is as a means of transporting electricity effectively, that you can convert electricity into hydrogen and then that could be transported and then used at another location to generate electricity. And so it is the possibility and effect of export of hydrogen, of electricity.
Thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to add to, how does government view hydrogen's role? Is this the silver bullet, in other words, for our challenges ahead?
I would describe it as an area of real potential where we are dedicating very serious attention and serious resources, as we've mentioned, through various investments. I think in order for us to deal with both the issues of the climate crisis and energy security, we're going to have to think of a number of different pathways and pursue a number of different pathways in order to achieve what we need to achieve. But hydrogen certainly has the potential of being a very significant part of that mix.
And that is the
Thank
time.
you.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Ms.
you.
Shanahan. Monsieur Trudel, votre tour encore pour 2 minutes 30 secondes.
Oui, monsieur.
Mr. Trudel, we're back to you for 2.5 minutes. Thank you. Now, going back to what we were discussing earlier and the carbon capture. This is new technology that's being used. It's being promoted by the Government of Canada. But there's a lot of skepticism surrounding it. Now, earlier I talked about the system where it's being captured and it's being buried in the ground. What happens? Now, I remember visiting a site in BC, and there was a question put with respect to an earthquake or the permafrost melting. There are thousands of tons of carbon that would be released because we wouldn't be able to contain them. Can you reassure us with respect to that? What do you think about that?
Combien de temps ça peut être gardé dans le...
Well, how long can it be kept in the ground? Is there a time limit that the carbon can remain in the ground without coming back to the surface? Do we have any information on that?
Mr. Chair, carbon capture and storage technology has been evolving over a number of years. It is not new, and we actually have applications of the technology that are functioning in Alberta. The Quest project is an example. There are a couple of references there. There's the storage of the carbon. There's also the means by which it's captured, and those are a couple of different issues in a sense. I believe what you're referring to is direct air capture, which is the drawing out of hydrogen from the atmosphere, which is technology that's evolving, where Canada is seeing some innovators who are making substantial contributions to the evolution of that technology. We also, though, have people who are investing and are real experts with respect to capture through industrial applications, through a variety of other applications of carbon that's generated. Storage of that carbon depends a bit on geologic formations. Canada has real advantages with respect to that as well. In Alberta, there are very substantial geologic formations that can form a real opportunity to store substantial amounts of carbon, and those are subject then to monitoring and to a series of other means by which the carbon is captured effectively for an indefinite period of time.
Qu'est-ce que vous répondez aux gens qui disent que...
Then what would you say to people who say that that's greenwashing? Just to show that action's being taken on greenhouse gas emissions, just greenwashing.
I would say that in order for us to achieve what we need to achieve in terms of decarbonization, we are going to need to pursue a whole series of different kinds of technologies, including carbon capture and storage. And that's been recognized internationally by leading authorities on energy and on climate. This is a technology that has real potential. We have a leadership role with respect to it, and there are opportunities, again, not just domestically, but also in terms of global markets.
Et voilà, merci beaucoup. Mr. Jager,
Thank you very much.
2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to return now to the assumptions versus what's really happening here in Canada. And I think the assumptions that are pointed out in the Auditor General's or the Commissioner's report are in fact used for a particular set of modeling we just heard. And there's also, of course, the existing modeling on policies and investments that are happening now. And so with that in mind, to the Deputy Minister of the Environment Canada, when approaching the issues that are present within the targets, and you can see within the Auditor or the Commissioner's report that relying on the assumptions-based modeling and versus the modeling of the current investments, that when asked about whether or not Canada can achieve its targets, that it's appropriate to be trying to be actually using the information and modeling that's present within the data that is modeling existing investment. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, I think, Mr. Chair, I would respond again by talking about how well the fact that,
like for example, like there's a grid. There's an electrical grid that's critically important. That's a cornerstone to the plan that your ministry is taking up, but that hasn't been in the government's current investments. And the assumptions, quote unquote, that are made is that this policy will be in place to actually hit those targets. That is not in place currently. Are there investments to the building of an electrical grid today?
I'm trying to make sure I understand the question. I mean, I think that the modeling effort incorporates all of those elements to the extent that we have that information, and it pulls on a number of inputs. It has to deal with policies that we know of, whether they're at the federal level, provincial level, happening across the economy. And I would also really highlight to the committee and to you that this is an evolutionary piece of work, right? We model efforts for each of our climate plans, but as people will know, when it comes to the progress report that we will have to make against our emission reduction plan in 2023, there will be, of course, an updated set of projections there, as my colleague, Mr. Hermanantz, mentioned. So these are...
So we won't know. It's evolving.
And I'm afraid that is the time. Ms. Hogan, if you'd like to respond to that very quickly, I'll allow that.
Well, I maybe, Derek, you have anything you wanted to add, because I think it's a pretty specific and important question.
Yeah, no, I would just add that, there are the two categories, the reference case and the additional measures. And as we introduce the additional measures into the modeling, often, we need to make some fairly high-level assumptions at the beginning, but as those policies evolve and further details are made available, then we can update those measures, and eventually those would be moved into the reference case if they're, funded, implemented, legislated.
Thank you very much. Mr. McCauley, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, thanks very much. Mr. Hannaford, is there any reasonable business case for hydrogen if it's not using natural gas?
The costs vary as between the feedstock, but I would say that one of the things you're seeing through some of the international investments is the technology continuing to evolve. So
we'll have to wait for kind of a Hail Mary for technology, I guess. Let me ask you, the Environment Commissioner, and this is to Natural Resources, stated rather a lack of viability because of the lack of the infrastructure. Has Natural Resources provided a projection on what it would cost for investments for the infrastructure required for hydrogen plans as projected by Environment or Natural Resources?
I'm sorry, was that a question to me?
Yes, to Natural Resources.
So we have been working on transportation routes as part of the overall study.
Right, but I'm asking, have we done a dollar projection of the costs to build the infrastructure required?
I'm not aware of any sort of specific studies of costing of infrastructure, but I'll look to my colleague. No, we have not.
Okay. Environment, have you performed such an analysis?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Should we not be doing that? Like, are we not putting the cart before the horse? This could be tens of billions and billions of dollars, and yet we've got all this wonderful projections from the government about hydrogen's doing this, it's going to do this, but we don't know actually how we're going to deliver it. Was that not part of any report or study?
Perhaps I could respond.
I'll take that as a no. Mr. Chair, I'm going to turn the rest of my time over to Mr.
McCauley. Mr. Hannaford was just about to answer, so why don't we let him do so?
Perfect, and then I'll turn my time over to Mr. McLean.
I think there are a couple issues here. There is currently the potential to move hydrogen to some degree. You can blend hydrogen with other gases, and it can be moved through existing infrastructure at relatively low ratios. But that is a possibility right now. The other possibilities are to look at other forms of transportation, and including looking at possibility of retrofit of some existing infrastructure. But those, right now, this is part of the ongoing conversation as we think about sort of the next steps with respect to hydrogen application.
Thanks. I'll turn it over to Mr. McLean.
Mr. McLean, good day. Thank you for joining us today. I understand you're just over environment, so you're wearing multiple hats today. You've got about 2 minutes and 11 seconds left in this round, and then we'll be moving on, but we will come back to you. So, Mr. McLean, over to you, please.
Thank you. Yeah, and much appreciated. And nice to see you, Mr. Hannaford. Let me pick up where my colleague left off when you just talked about transportation of hydrogen and light qualities across Canada. Is that certified at this point in time, or is that a work in progress? Let's go with that first of all.
Sorry, the mic wasn't on. Can you repeat yourself, please?
I'm sorry. I would describe it as a work in progress.
I would too. Thank you very much. And what do you think that's going to require? Like 5% hydrogen into the natural gas stream in Canada?
You know, I maybe we'll defer to my colleague on sort of details, but the blending levels, I think this is one of the areas where we continue to study what the effect of higher concentrations of hydrogen would be on existing infrastructure. That's where you get into questions around retrofit as well, but I'll turn to my colleague.
No, I think you've answered the question fairly well. I appreciate it. I'll get your colleague later in the day. So we're talking about a test right now to get to approximately 5% hydrogen and a 95% remainder gas stream, but turning that 5% of hydrogen from natural gas into hydrogen to get there. So really testing the infrastructure we have over what would you say, a 3-year process?
That's my.
Okay, and then we'll get to 10% in the next 3 to 5 years?
So Natural Resources Canada is currently looking at the natural gas system to assess the impacts of blending hydrogen into the system. So that work, as you can imagine, it's a big network. It's going to take about 3 years to understand exactly how much blending can happen, what kind of retrofits might be required to do that blending, and what kind of percentages like we do. We know that, for example, some pipelines out east accept a higher blend without much retrofit, while some are older pipelines that require a full overhaul to accept hydrogen. It really will depend.
Okay, and those pipelines, those retrofits you're talking about, are they going to have higher carbon content?
A higher what, sorry?
Higher carbon content in the pipe?
I'm not going to, I could get back to you on specifics of the requirements. Typically, we know out east they use some plastic-based materials, and those tend to be more resilient to hydrogen, but I would like to get back to you on that one in particular, if you'd like.
And thank you very much. And just for clarification from the chair, when you say out east, is that Atlantic Canada?
Atlantic Canada, yes.
Sometimes Western Canadians confuse Central and Eastern Canada, and it's from New Brunswick. I just want to be clear for the record. Turning now to Mr. Fragiskatos, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much for the time today. Mr. Hannaford, you were talking about where things are evolving as far as green hydrogen is concerned. Mr. McCauley is prone to doing, and I say this almost as a compliment because he's turned it into an art, completed your sentence for you in talking about a Hail Mary pass, which you did not say. I wonder if you remember that moment in the interaction, if you wanted to complete what you were trying to say.
Mr. Chair, the focus is on achieving the lowest carbon concentration possible with respect to the generation of hydrogen, and so we've framed our approach not so much on colors as on basically carbon intensity, and that is a technological question as to how you reduce the carbon intensity of the fuel. The technology has already advanced pretty materially over the course of the last period of time. We've gone basically to a higher heat application of separation of the molecules to create the hydrogen, and that if you combine that with capturing the methane at source, gets you a very low carbon intensity product. The investments that are being made by some of our partners, and particularly note the investments through the United States' recent legislation, do create a real dynamic here that we are mindful of. And we have been making substantial investments ourselves, both in terms of our own tax measures and in terms of direct investments through the Clean Fuel Fund and other mechanisms. But it is with a view to that kind of technological evolution. And, you know, we're seeing the results of that to a degree.
Thank you very much. This goes to both you, sir, and to Deputy Minister Hogan. One of the key findings from the report, as you know, is that, and I'm quoting now, we found the two departments used unrealistic assumptions for modeling the potential of hydrogen to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I think you've addressed it, but I would like it on the record as clear as possible. Where does each department stand in response to that particular finding?
We have taken the recommendations of the Commissioner, but as I said at the outset, you know, the exercises that we were engaged in were different exercises. And Natural Resources Canada had been engaged in what we have termed a call to action, because it was really intended to show the potential of hydrogen as a fuel, and that's the sort of results you see are reflective of that approach.
Thank you so much. And as I hope I did in my opening comments and in subsequent questions, underscore again that the Environment Canada modeling that is referenced in the Commissioner's report, of course, is a set of policies and measures that are contained in the Strengthened Climate Plan. And of course, the reference that has been made to the hydrogen numbers, we simply were able to use a proxy for hydrogen because the strategy was still under development at that time. And further refinements continue to be made to our model, as we've seen. I would also, if I have the opportunity, just highlight that in the emission reduction plan that came out in March, there is an extremely comprehensive annex in that document to the approach to modeling. It can be a very complex and complicated space, and we are doing our best to try to unpack how the modeling works against our climate plans. And also, similar to Mr. Hannaford's comments, I just also want to say that we acknowledge the recommendations of the Commissioner. And in fact, one of the other initiatives that is highlighted in the emission reduction plan is a commitment, and it's referenced in our management action plan as well, to an expert-led process that will allow us to kind of take stock and continue to enhance our modeling efforts going forward.
20 seconds.
I think I'll end it there, and I'll thank you, all of you, to the public servants for your work. Thank you, and to the Auditor General's office, of course.
Thank you very much. Our next round, we're going to go back to Mr. McLean. You have the floor for 5 minutes. And you're on mute, Mr. McLean.
Yeah, I got it there. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sometimes the mouse isn't that good. Let me go on some a different tack here. And thanks for the input earlier on infrastructure that has not been addressed as far as what Canada is going to have to undergo in order to switch to a hydrogen economy, even as little as we can by 2030. But the production of hydrogen is amongst the most inefficient power production in the world. Would you agree, Mr. Hannaford?
I would agree that it is expensive in the current circumstances, but that's one of the reasons why we are making the investments we are making in order to advance the technology and to create the scale that will see some economic returns.
Okay, well, that's, advance the technologies and make the investments. Does this mean bet on technologies that don't exist?
Building on technologies that are evolving now, and there may well be new applications. I think we were talking earlier about carbon capture and storage. You're seeing technologies where one of the ways that natural gas is reformed is to use microwave to essentially create solid carbon. and hydrogen. So a very different kind of storage situation with that kind of application. So the point only being that this is an evolving space.
Thank you. Yeah, you're correct. Let's look at the impetus for green hydrogen in this country, because we've had some announcements on it. Is green hydrogen the most expensive, least efficient power produced on the planet?
And that comes from electrolysis is expensive and is it is relatively expensive to the feedstock of natural gas. But again, this is subject to evolution, and that's partially a question of investment.
Yeah, well, okay, that's interesting. I was at the International Energy Agency, and Andrew Forrest of FFI, who is one of the participants in the Canadian Green Energy Experiment, said that it'll be 20 to 30 years away before it's anywhere near economic as far as green hydrogen goes. So are we investing billions of dollars in a technology that might emerge 20 or 30 years down the road?
Mr. Chair, there are current applications of hydrogen.
We're talking about green hydrogen. Not hydrogen.
But in a certain sense, hydrogen is hydrogen. There are current applications once one has created the hydrogen that exist right now, and that includes transportation. They're seeing application in trains, for instance.
No, but Mr. Hannaford, the question is the efficiency of the process in green hydrogen, because we actually consume more power, if you'll acknowledge, producing green hydrogen currently than comes out the other end. So effectively, we're energy negative. Would you agree?
I think the question becomes the manner in which you are generating the energy. So one possibility that is being considered very actively right now is the possibility of using wind on the East Coast, where you use wind to generate the electricity that then converts the water into hydrogen.
All of which results in more power consumed than energy produced at the end of the day. And then there's the shipping of it over, of course, into ammonia or methanol for a buyer that is not locked up at this point in time to pay the exorbitant amount of it's going to cost for that energy or hydrogen chemical alternative. Is this something that you were just hoping emerges, the different pieces of it, or is there any plan to actually look at what the expectations are, where the market is, and what people are going to pay for this at the end of the day?
Well, we have active arrangements right now. We have an arrangement with the Germans, which is a structured conversation precisely to determine, what that market will look like. And
I had a discussion with the Germans last year about taking Canadian LNG, and it was too expensive for them. So now you're going to tell me the most expensive power on the planet, that they've committed to taking that at whatever it costs us to produce it?
The conversation continues on LNG as well, but I would say that a number of drivers would lead the Germans to be interested in the conversations that we are having right now. And one of them is the fact that there is an energy challenge in Europe right now as a result of what's going on in Ukraine. So multiple sources of energy are attractive as a result of that geopolitical reality. But the other piece of it...
But, yeah, my understanding is the hydrogen they're looking at taking from us, they're going to use for chemical processes, not for energy processes.
Their piece of it is that they are looking at alternative energies of a number of different varieties in order to meet their climate objectives. And hydrogen is at least one potential source there.
Mm-hmm.
And that
so
is,
the climate
and that is the time, Mr. McLean, we will come back to you, I believe. Turning now to Ms. Bradford. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses today for coming in and discussing this important topic about hydrogen's potential role to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So, Mr. Hannaford, you seem to be the popular witness of the day. Just kind of continuing on a line of questioning here, recommendation 3.34 states that Natural Resources Canada should perform a comprehensive bottom-up modeling for the use of hydrogen. The modeling should account for the following: emission reduction efficiencies by sector, cost of emission reductions per megaton of carbon dioxide equivalent, substitutional fuels, for example, biofuel electrification, credit systems, and feasible deployment of technologies in supporting infrastructure. How feasible would it be to integrate these elements into the department's currently modeling systems and practices?
I am going to diversify witnesses.
Oh,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So that's a great question, and it's one that we're working on right now. The modeling that we did for the strategy, we are updating it currently. And so we've worked very closely with colleagues at Environment Climate Change Canada, with the Canada Energy Regulator, with other departments that are interested, frankly, in this, and have scoped work that we've retained an external consultant to do exactly that. And so our plan is to have workshops within our hydrogen strategy working groups. We have 16 working groups with various parts of the private sector that are involved in provinces and territories in various parts, and then, validate those early results with them and understand and make sure the assumptions are correct and realistic. And so we expect that to be coming out early 2023 as we continue to work on it, and then we'll publish it as we do the annual update for the strategy.
okay. So recommendation 3.35 states that based on the updated modeling, Natural Resources Canada, in partnership with interested stakeholders, should publish a hydrogen market development roadmap to track the progress and outcomes of the deployment of hydrogen in Canada. Is this approach similar to how other federal organizations address other clean technologies?
Hi. Thanks, Mr. Chair. So yes, absolutely. So as we think about the full potential of hydrogen in this case, we want to develop that in collaboration with people in the sector who are making investments, who are buying hydrogen, who are generating hydrogen. And so absolutely consistent with how we would, I would imagine, work with other sectors of the economy and other energy sectors.
So should such a roadmap also consider including consumer and industry buy-in metrics like willingness to adopt, implement, support its use, etc.?
Yes, absolutely. And we, in the context of our Clean Fuel Fund, for example, we have an awareness component to that. So we provide a little bit of funding to promote that public awareness and confidence in fuels like hydrogen and other clean fuels. So absolutely.
And what is the status of the regional blueprints that you've been developing in partnership with provinces and territories and key stakeholders?
I can take that one. So we have launched, the whole process launched last June, and the initial phase was with respect to British Columbia, Newfoundland, and Manitoba. Since then, we've launched across the country. Still a few provinces outstanding, but conversations are well underway. And at this stage, we're working on kind of identification of shared priorities in order to then go to the next stage, which is a very focused conversation not only with the province or territory, but also with Indigenous communities, labor movement, local business community, and other experts to basically dig down as to where we can make a real difference here and think about then how best to mobilize the resources we have available to us to do so.
And what is the status of the reporting framework for the biannual progress report, which will track the progress on the recommendations outlined in the hydrogen strategy for Canada?
We're on track to report the next progress report next year.
When's it due?
I believe it's March. Is that right?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, how much time do I have left, Chair?
That actually is the time. I just wanted to confirm that was March. You said the mics are just kind of flicking on and off, so I'll just look. Yeah, thank you very much, Ms. Bradford. I'm afraid that is the time. Just a few seconds over. Mr. Trudel, c'est encore toi. 2 minutes 30 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
Go ahead, Mr. Trudel. You have 2.5 minutes. Well, thank you. I'm going to leave you alone there, Mr. Hanford. We'll go to Ms. Hogan. Ms. Hogan, the carbon tax is at what? What's the rate here in Canada? The carbon tax. What's the current rate here in Canada? It's 50. And in January, it's going to go up to what?
Dollars. each year, in April, not in January.
En avril, pas en janvier.
In April, not January. $15 then, you're saying. So it'll be $65.
C'est ce que j'entends?
Is that what you're saying?
Doug, do you have that?
D'accord. Donc, quand mes amis conservateurs disent
So when my conservative friends say that they're going to be tripling, well, that's not what's going to happen. Now, the OECD is saying that it's effective, that if what we need to do is reduce greenhouse gas emissions, a tax is one of the tools. And now I'm hearing myself in my own ear here, but it's one of the best tools to, but it would have to be $175 then in 2030 per ton. Are we heading that direction? Are we not farther away from that target?
I have to confess I'm not specifically familiar with the OECD report that you're referring to, but as you know, putting a price on pollution is one of the foundational building blocks of Canada's climate plan, and we have laid out a trajectory through to 2030, and that will take us to $170 a ton.
Okay. Tantôt, j'ai...
Now, earlier, I mentioned UN experts, a director who said that we needed to leave fossil fuels in the ground if we hope to make progress, if we hope to meet our targets. Now, Canada is in the Bay du Nord project, which is off the coast of Newfoundland. It's billions of barrels that we're going to be able to bring out over the next 30 years. That's incompatible with our targets to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by 40% in the budget. Don't you agree with that?
I would ask if you could just repeat the question. I'm not sure I fully...
The Bay du Nord project. It's a federal government project off the coast of Newfoundland. It's an oil project, a drilling project. And the objective of that project is to get out between 500 million and 1 billion barrels of oil over the next 30 years. At a time when the UN says we need to set aside all of those projects, the oil needs to stay in the ground if we hope to achieve our greenhouse gas emission targets. Canada has established a 40 to 45% reduction by, 2030, 2050? Briefly, if you can. So is that not incompatible with achieving that objective, taking that oil out of the ground off the coast of Newfoundland?
Mr. Chair, the Bay du Nord project is one I'm familiar with. It's somewhat outside the scope of our discussions here today. We'd be happy to come back and talk about those issues.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. Mr. Desjardins, and just for members, I did allow more time there because the witness did not understand the question, so I allowed the member, Mr. Trudel, to repeat it. I know he went well over his time, but I think just given the sometimes challenges of translation, I wanted to allow that. So if you're watching the clock, I know he was over, but I think we ended up at the right place. Mr. Desjardins, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to return to the Deputy Minister of Environment, if we can. We just heard in my previous round of questioning that in relation to the two models, and I'll be as clear as possible, one of those models is a model that projects existing policies and investments. The other one projects what the Auditor General's office and the Commissioner are calling assumptions. And we just heard from the Director General of your department that it's the intention, the policy intention, to adopt some of these policies over time and to build them into the plan. And so it sounds like they're more like goals than they are like a solid plan that we can project with credibility, guaranteed reduction in emissions. So if we're lending this much credibility to what are defined in the Commissioner's report as assumptions, have you actually spoken to the Minister and directly about adopting these principles that are within your reporting to actually hit the targets that he's committed to?
Thank you very, very much. One thing I would like to say in response, Mr. Chair, is of course if you go from the Strengthened Climate Plan to the emission reduction plan that came out some 14, 15 months later, the modeling that went into the Strengthened Climate Plan evolved to reflect the actions, decisions, policies, and measures that the government had taken and then updated again. So this continues to be how the modeling work progresses. And
would you define it as incremental? Because it seems to me like it's more like action by increment than it is by firm action by policy decisions. And so if there's a magic list of policies that you have that the government needs to adopt to actually get to the targets it set out as per the plan, has the government actually invested in those solutions? One of those solutions I'd like to remind you within the plan is in relation to the greening of our energy grid. Mm-hmm. How much money is the minister committed to that?
I think the response to that is if you look at the emission reduction plan on its own, it contained $9.1 billion of investments across the economy in various sectors, and there were subsequent investments made in Budget 2022.
But on this and on this specific one,
and I'm afraid that is your time. That is the time, Mr. Desjardins. Pardon me. Mm-hmm. Turning now back to Mr. McLean, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not going to try and pick on any of the witnesses here. So whoever wants to answer this question, we've talked about this incremental approach we're going to have to take in our infrastructure system, particularly our gas infrastructure system, as we put 5% in, first of all, into hydrogen, into the gas mix, and then move it up from there 3 to 5 years each time and see what happens from an effects perspective. Was it prudent then for NRCan to move forward with a transformative approach as opposed to an incremental approach in looking at what the outcome would be as far as emissions goes? Anyone?
I think that's probably me. So I would say that, as I mentioned at the outset, the intention of that report was the intention of the strategy was to set out full potential. Since the strategy was released, we've taken a series of measures at NRCan, including through the Clean Fuels Fund, to then look at specific applications of clean fuels, and that includes significantly hydrogen, as an area of focus. And so recent announcements were of $800 million, and there'll be subsequent announcements before too long. Those are specific investments in specific projects and will then continue to move along the technology and the applications of the technology. In addition to that, I mentioned earlier the tax credit that has been included as a fiscal measure recently. And
that's tax credits don't reduce emissions. Let me read the paragraph we're talking about, 327. I'm sure you know it. The transformative scenario developed by Natural Resources Canada projected that hydrogen could represent up to 15% of the emissions reduction needed to meet the 2030 target. In contrast to this, we found that one of Natural Resources Canada's incremental demand reports projected that in 2030, hydrogen will contribute only 0.5% of the 2030 target and 5.5% of the 2040 target. The department did not find this estimation compelling and chose to use more aspirational numbers in the hydrogen strategy for Canada modeling. This is a choice you made. It isn't something that was based on any reality. We need a result. We need to put some numbers here that actually show we're going to do something that defy reality that actually exists in your department. I'll take comment on that, but it does seem to be a huge stretch where you arrived at these numbers, Mr. Hannaford.
Mr. Chair, as I say, the intention here was to introduce a call to action, and that included then ambitious potential actions that could be taken to advance the use and production of hydrogen. And I would take one step back too. When we talk about the transportation of hydrogen, infrastructure is part of that, but the applications become part of it too. As we think about the use of heavy vehicles as applications of fuel cells, that is a localized use, which obviously is then intended for movement, but that's not then the use of a...
Okay, Mr. Hannaford, thank you. I think we're filling time. How much time do I have, Mr. Chair?
A minute and a half.
Okay, let's, Mr. Hannaford, or one of your officials, are you familiar with Enerdata, international data collecting firm on energy? Okay, Enerdata actually shows that Canada, energy as a percentage of our GDP has gone down over the last 30 years from 26%, as 26% input for each unit of GDP, to 17%. We're still the 5th highest in the world. We know we live in a northern climate, but we've made significant progress as far as the amount of energy we consume. If we produce green hydrogen, that ratio is going to reverse. The number one way we can address global warming is to keep that efficiency ratio going down. Would you agree?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm not familiar with the report. What I would say is that in order for us to achieve our overall climate objectives, we're going to have to think through a number of different technologies, and hydrogen is one of them.
30 seconds, Mr. McLean.
Even though at this point in time it is power, energy, negative.
As I say, Mr. Chair,
So what I'm saying is you're saying, okay, it doesn't matter what happens, how much greenhouse gas we produce between now and 2030. It matters what might happen in 2060. So short-term pain environmentally for potential gain way down the road.
Well, I'm not saying that we would be increasing our carbon footprint as a result.
Well, I am.
And I'm afraid that is the time. That is the time. Ms. Yip, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
It's great to see so many witnesses here in person. Thank you. My question is for Ms. Hogan. Environmental groups say that the carbon capture, utilization, and storage tax credit is yet another subsidy. Why are you putting that in place?
Well, I would just say thank you very much for the question, and I would respond that similar to some of the earlier comments that have been made, it's going to take a whole suite of measures to achieve what are some very ambitious climate goals in Canada. And I think my colleague from Natural Resources Canada spoke very, very well about the potential role of things like carbon capture, utilization, and storage, and other technologies. And so it is one important piece, and the government's decision to put in a tax credit is in recognition of that.
Okay. Mr. Hannaford, with respect to the CUS, do you feel that it's on target to reach net zero by 2050?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, with respect to carbon capture and storage?
Yes.
Well, I think carbon capture and storage has the potential of making a real contribution. As I mentioned earlier, we are already seeing the application of the technology, and it continues to evolve. And as parts of industry look to reduce their carbon footprint, and I'm thinking, the Pathways group out of the oil sands has enunciated a vision of being net zero. That will be a significant application of carbon capture and storage to meet our overall objectives over time.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Hogan, what is the status of the commitment to convene an expert-led process to provide advice on the modeling regime? I know you touched on experts, but I'd like to know a little bit more as to what these experts will be doing.
Thank you so much for that question. And as I mentioned, that is something that is referenced in our action plan. It was something that we spoke to in the emission reduction plan. And the work is underway. I can tell you that the independent expert has completed an initial scoping exercise with Environment and Climate Change Canada staff and internal and external modeling experts. This exercise will inform how we move forward.
Sorry, what do you mean by scoping?
They're looking at what the specific terms of reference might be for the next steps, how broad the expert process should be, how we might want to proceed with the engagement of experts, internal and external to government. I think the important thing for members to be aware of is that we do intend to incorporate the advice that comes out of this expert process in time for the 2023 ERP, the Emission Reduction Plan Progress Report that is required under the Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act.
Thank you. Mr. Hannaford, what is the role of hydrogen in addressing Europe's energy crisis? I know you mentioned just a little bit, but I'd like to hear more. This is what happens when you're at the end. You want to hear more of just little points.
Mr. Chair, as I mentioned, the geopolitics have certainly changed in Europe, obviously, as a result of the aggression of Russia and Ukraine, and that has really brought to the fore the geopolitics of energy. And our partners are looking to Canada to continue to be a significant energy supplier, and looking at various means by which that could take place. And we've talked very briefly about the arrangements that we have in place with such key partners as Germany. But just to expand on that a bit, we had the degree of interest of having the Chancellor visit Canada in order to reinforce the relationship in a number of ways, but hydrogen was a very significant part of that conversation. And we've seen one of the outcomes of that was then an MOU that was signed with the German government. But we also have conversations ongoing with the European Union generally and with other members of the European Union around energy. And hydrogen for the Europeans is an avenue that they are actively pursuing. That's in terms of the application of the technologies, but also looking then at sources. And Canada has real potential with respect to that as a possible reliable exporter in a world where the geopolitics are complicated.
Thank you very much. That is the time. Turning now to Mr. McLean again. You have the floor for 5 minutes, sir.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good follow on there. Thank you, Mr. Hannaford, for that, talking about Germany and their role in the world right now. Germany came here asking for LNG, and our Prime Minister said there is no business case for LNG, which was loudly contradicted by every business interest in Canada. So in as much as they would have come here and said, can you get us some LNG? We said no, apparently. And yet there is an MOU here for hydrogen for their chemical processes, not for their power processes. This is what it's going to be meant for going forward. This isn't the production of hydrogen for energy purposes. It's production of hydrogen for chemical processes. I'm going to reiterate that too. That's my understanding with meeting one of the proponents. If we're going to meet the world's needs, we're talking about $50 per MCF equivalent that was paid for natural gas in Europe this summer. Your modeling shows a natural gas price of $3.79 here, and that's a 2020 number, I appreciate, in Canada. If we multiply that by the amount they're paying for gas over in Europe right now, it's an astronomical number. But on an inflationary number, think about what we're talking about here, because your numbers show that if we actually use green hydrogen in Canada, the amount is 20 times higher for energy production than it is with natural gas. 20 times. So $3.79 versus $62.60 per equivalent unit of energy. Can you tell us what you think effect this is going to have on inflation for Canadians that need to power their homes?
Mr. Chair, several elements to that question. First of all, the ongoing modeling is something that we continues to evolve. We mentioned earlier that we're continuing to have conversations with colleagues at ECCC, with the CER, and with outside sources to make sure that we have refined models as to what the future of hydrogen is. With respect to LNG, I guess a couple of points. One of them is, as we look at the sort of next steps with respect to.
Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Hannaford, I'm not asking for input on LNG. Was just stating what happened in the news with our elected officials. What I'm asking you here is the cost to Canadian consumers of switching to a green hydrogen industry development that replaces a natural gas energy source. And if your numbers are right, it's 20 times more expensive. Is that correct?
As I say, Mr. Chair, our ongoing review of our modeling is to be as accurate as possible. We'll see the outcomes of that with our next.
Well, I'm asking, your model here shows it's 20 times more expensive. Is that correct? If it's incorrect, let me know.
Well, the numbers that are reflected in the report are from 2020.
Yes. Do you think the numbers changed now?
I think that there have been
62.60 per MCF equivalent for the production of green hydrogen.
I think
that number will go up.
One of the reasons why we're continuing to have the conversations with experts is to make sure that we have the most accurate numbers possible.
And I deal with the experts here at a group called Transition Accelerator that's actually moving incrementally towards getting hydrogen into our economy as a solution. But your transformative approach was a Hail Mary, throw something at the wall, which should never have been considered by a serious government department. So I am challenging you on that, why you ever went with that scenario.
Mr. Chair, the intention of the report was to show full potential. We have taken a series of tangible steps over the course of the last several years, including significant investments in the production of hydrogen through natural gas sources. That's concurrent with steps that have been taken by provincial governments and will be reflected then in sort of further work that we do with the provincial and territorial governments through the regional table approach. And this is all with a view to being as tangible as possible as to how we take steps with respect to the evolution of our energy markets.
30 seconds,
Okay.
Mr. McLean.
Well, we've talked about costs, we've talked about infrastructure, we've talked about the actual delivery and the net negative energy proposed in green hydrogen. I think that have I got another round here, Mr. Chair?
No, you don't.
Okay. The effects on Canadians here, of course, is going to be severe. Would you acknowledge that, Mr. Hannaford, that there's a lot we don't see here as far as our results, and the cost effect on Canadians is going to be huge if we move in this direction? Is inflation at all a part of your concern?
We're absolutely mindful of cost as a general matter with respect to energy policy, and I would say that the announcements with respect to things like the heat pumps recently were with a view to energy costs for individuals. I would say that we view hydrogen as a matter of potential, as I say, not only for the application domestically, but also because there is a global market that is forming here, and that has the potential of having significant economic benefits for Canada.
Thank you. And just a clarification, Mr. McLean, there will be another round for the Conservatives. I'm told you might be taking that, so we might see you again. Mr. Dong, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just want to follow, my Conservative colleagues' question on the consumer side, looking at this technology from the consumer side. We know the government has set the very aggressive goals for all new cars on the market not to be combustion engines with using fossil fuel. How soon will we see, vehicles using hydrogen technology on the road? Do you have, I know it's a bit unfair to ask this, but any estimate at all?
We're seeing them now. There are hydrogen vehicles that are driving on Canadian roads.
And would they be, say, 10 years from now, will we see a good portion of them being used by Canadians and Canadian families?
Sorry. I think that there's going to be a variety of different ways of dealing with transportation. It's possible that light vehicles may steer more towards battery technologies rather than hydrogen technologies. It may be that the way the market will work is to steer more towards medium and light or medium and heavy vehicles applying hydrogen technologies. But the use of a fuel cell is possible in a consumer car. As I say, there are examples right now. And we are also making investments with respect to the infrastructure, because that's obviously a critical enabler here, is to look at stations that will allow for refueling.
Yeah, that's very important, and to make it convenient so people can use it. I've had conversations with auto manufacturing in that industry. It seems to me that there's a bottleneck for what type of fuel that can be refueled, or what type of energy can replace fossil fuel. Like you said, light vehicles are electricity power. It's doable, and we've seen many of them. But when it comes to larger vehicles, transports, even trains, electrical power, that it doesn't seem. There seems to me there's a bottleneck. So maybe hydrogen is a solution to replace clean diesel or whatnot. Would you agree with that?
Certainly has potential, yes.
Okay. And just quickly, any idea on how much that will cost consumers? Would they be cheaper to consumers than what we're currently seeing at the gas pump? Do you have any idea on that?
I mean, I think over time the price point will drop. This is one of the reasons why we're looking at the sorts of incentives and the sort of frameworks that we are discussing right now. But I think right now, the relative price is higher with respect to hydrogen. But as I say, that's partially a question of scale, and it's partially a question then of investments in technology.
I want to come back to the energy cost to produce hydrogen, and I didn't quite understand, because I understand the line of question that it sounds like it costs more electricity to produce hydrogen, which could be used as form of energy to produce electricity. But does that, in your analysis, does that make sense? Does that make sense to in terms of production, energy production? Does that make any sense? Like, why would you spend more electricity to produce less electricity?
Well,
using hydrogen technology.
I think one of the applications here, to take, say, wind. So if you look at onshore or offshore wind on the East Coast, you have the possibility then of generating electricity that would create the hydrogen that then could be transported or consumed in another way. So it's a way of capturing electricity, and becomes then a vector for electricity as well.
Safety is a major concern for this technology. Can you update the committee on on the safety concerns of this technology at this point?
Turn to my colleague on this.
Thanks. So that's certainly a consideration. We have dedicated working groups that, through the hydrogen strategy, we are specifically looking at standards, codes, and precautions. As you say, safety is certainly number one for us.
Et merci beaucoup. That is the time, Mr. Dong, I'm afraid. That's 5 minutes. Monsieur Trudel, vous avez la parole pour 2 minutes 30.
Mr. Trudel, you've got 2.5 minutes, and we're really short on time. Well, thank you. I'd like to come back to a question. I'm surprised by your lack of answer to the question yesterday. You're the Deputy Minister of ECCC. I've got a press release in front of me from your department from July 2021 that says that Canada is committing to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40 to 45% between now and 2025. Your department put out this. There's the Bay du Nord project that is an oil project. It's thousands and thousands of barrels of oil per year. That's going to create greenhouse gas emissions. So what we're hearing this afternoon is that in the short term, hydrogen isn't a structural approach that will help us reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Maybe in 10 to 15 years it will, except that now we're just in the initial stages of it. We don't know where it's going to lead. So I'm trying to get a concrete picture of all of this. There's the carbon tax that will be going up in April. Now you're saying it'll only have a small impact, but what are the structural measures that your government is putting in place in order to meet that objective of a 45% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions between now and 2030?
Well, merci beaucoup pour
Thank you for your question.
Just draw you back to the emission reduction plan that the government brought forward in March, contained $9.1 billion in new investments, reflects economy-wide measures, some of which you've mentioned, carbon pricing, clean fuels, while also targeting specific actions sector by sector, from building sector to vehicles to industry to agriculture and to energy, which we've heard a lot about today. That plan was developed with input from tens of thousands of Canadians, experts, and a very elaborate consultation process. It is, as I think we've tried to emphasize today, an evergreen plan, which will evolve over time, but it does present a comprehensive roadmap that reflects levels of ambition aligned to the Canadian target of 40 to 45% reductions by 2030. This will be the subject of scrutiny, and it is, and through the new Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act, the government is obliged to bring forward progress reports against that emission reduction plan starting next year in 2023. So there are a lot of elements to the emission reduction plan, very detailed implementation plans against each sector, and as I did mention, also a fairly detailed annex that outlines exactly how we got to the measures, the modeling plan.
And thank you very much. Mr. Desjardins, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes, and the time is pretty tight now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'll be quick. In terms of the comments just made by the Deputy Minister being ambitious in the plans that they set out to do, it's important, I believe, especially given the report by the Commission, by the Commissioner of Environment, that we actually make sure that those ambitions in words transition to ambitions in action. And that is the concern of parliamentarians, and that is the concern of Canadians. And that is what we heard in the remarks of the Commissioner was the issue of trust and ensuring that we can actually build the public capacity and the public trust that is necessary to achieve those goals. We heard that from the Commissioner this morning in terms of the concept of trust. To the Deputy Minister, how do we intend to actually ensure that we build trust for Canadians in ensuring that we hit the targets that are set out by the government when we know that the data that's collected in terms of the modeling to this point is insufficient in the way that it presents information, and in some ways can be seen as misleading. And I think that is the important part of the report that was published by the Commissioner as it makes a distinguishment between facts and assumptions. And so in relation to the assumptions, the things that are necessary to hit the targets here in Canada, but may not be actually invested in, how do we actually close that gap? And what do you do directly as Deputy Minister to actually achieve the construction of the good policies that you call evergreen policy or evergreen part of the evergreen strategy? How do you actually build in the things that are needed in Canada, like a green energy grid, into the actual work of your department? And how do we actually get to a point where we see those results in a transparent way?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for that question. I would what you're highlighting is the attention to implementation, and I think that is fully my preoccupation and the preoccupation of many across government who have initiatives that are detailed in the emission reduction plan. It's one of the reasons why the plan includes implementation plans sector by sector, so that you can see how the various initiatives and measures are being advanced. And there will be
but are they being invested in?
Yes, they are, and I mentioned the $9.1 billion that came and subsequent investments in budgets.
How much in the green grid?
I don't exactly have that number, but I can get you that. happy
Thank you.
to do so.
Sure.
I'm sure Mr. Desjardins would like that information. Your time is up. And turning now back to Mr. McLean, please, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Desjardins. Those are really important questions. I'm going to go to paragraph 331 here in one of the criticisms of the report here. We found that when assessing opportunities to generate hydrogen using electrolysis, Natural Resources Canada assumed a very low price of electricity across all provinces. For example, using an electricity price of $40 per megawatt hour across all provinces. This was well below the recent prices observed in Canadian provinces in 2020, which ranged from $52 to $124 per megawatt hour and $264 in the Muskrat Falls scenario. This meant that the department overestimated the opportunity for electrolysis to produce hydrogen at low cost. So following on Mr. Desjardins, all the assumptions you're making in this report you put forward seem like they're back-end engineered. Can you comment on that, please?
I'll turn to my colleague on this.
So thanks for the question, Mr. Chair. The process to come up with those cost assumptions was not NRCan's alone, right? We hired external consultants. We had lots of engagement with lots of experts across many of the provinces, and not all. And so that's how we came to this number. And
so you're saying there's plenty of blame to go around?
I'm sorry, is there a question? Or I think that we are updating those assumptions based on the new costs as they become clear, and we'll have that in March or early next year.
Well, I'll comment that Canadians do expect you to give them a realistic scenario about what we're facing going here, and I think that the report's quite clear that this is a very unrealistic scenario. Let's talk about the full cycle cost of carbon involved in green hydrogen, or any type of hydrogen, if you will, because it does matter. It matters with the production of the steel and the concrete and the copper and everything that's going to come from overseas to produce new turbines. And they've got a 2-year run rate before they're actually energy positive from the inputs that go into their production. In the 10-year life, obviously, they're going to produce something at the end of the day, but they're also going to produce a lot of emissions. And those emissions go up as the resources in the world become more scarce. Have you modeled that into your scenario at all? That'd be an environment question, I think, more than anything.
Derek, Derek Hermanance, would you like to respond to that in terms of the scenarios?
Just say our scenarios, working in consultation with other departments and other parts of the department, try to build in the most realistic assumptions that we can with using the best information we have at the time.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I didn't think I answered the question. I think we've proven pretty clearly on this report that the assumptions built in here don't seem realistic at all. But there is a cost here. There is a short-term and long-term CO2 cost, and there's an indication why we aren't getting lower carbon production in Canada, because we aren't counting the full cycle of this. And offshoring carbon production doesn't work either. If we get wind towers built in Germany and don't count that as part of our carbon footprint, if we're going to use them in Canada for producing hydrogen, then we're missing half the equation. I'm going to go back to the modeling here in both your departments and say, was this modeling driven from on high in order to come up with a result to meet a government narrative as opposed to a realistic scenario?
I would say it's our most realistic scenario at the time of the Strengthened Climate Plan, and it's a bottom-up modeling initiative. So it looks at each individual policy.
Well, okay,
in
So
conjunction with each other.
So this is the difference between the ECC plan. You're telling me the bottom-up analysis, which would be the incremental analysis, not the transformative one that NRCan put together. So I'm getting a bit of a contradiction there.
I'm speaking of our Environment Canada modeling.
Okay, and which differs strongly from the NRCan model, the transformative NRCan model, correct?
It's a different exercise.
30 seconds,
As we
Mr.
said
McLean.
from the start.
And the exercise is to come up with a realistic scenario about what this is going to cost Canadians, what this is going to cost the environment, and how we actually attain a goal. I'll ask either department if they actually put something reasonable on the table here about how we actually come to a result here that ends up with actual decarbonization in the world.
Mr. Chair, I would say that we are continuing to have our conversations with experts, with other departments, with the CER, all with a view to being as accurate as we can be as to this area.
And thank you very much, Mr. McLean. That is your time. Ms. Shanahan, do you have any more questions? The floor is yours, but I understand. Yes, go ahead.
I would just like to allow each department to just summarize why they used different models, because I think that's the key here, because assumptions go with models and models are attached to the strategy or the approach. So if I can go to the environment folks first, can you explain the difference in your modeling assumptions between your department and Natural Resources Canada?
Thank you, and always appreciate the opportunity to further clarify. And as I mentioned in my opening comments, Environment and Climate Change Canada's modeling, the modeling that's referenced in the Commissioner's report, focused on a set of policies and measures contained in the Strengthened Climate Plan, including a single proxy for hydrogen strategy that was still under development at the time of at that time. It's important to distinguish the modeling that NRCan did to develop its hydrogen strategy from the work that Environment Canada did to produce a model for a broad, comprehensive climate plan. So hopefully that helps clarify matters somewhat. And to underline that the modeling that Environment Canada undertakes for things like the Strengthened Climate Plan or the Emission Reduction Plan are done following international guidelines that are established for reporting on progress related to Canadian targets. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Excellent. If I can ask Mr. Hannaford then, if he can summarize why NRCan took the approach that it did in modeling.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Our intention through the hydrogen strategy was to create a call to action, which was to show the potential of this area of energy generation. And this was something that was a product of analysis that was done, as my colleague mentioned, through a series of consultations with experts. We continue to do that consultation, and that's one of the reasons why we are committed to a progress report, which will further refine the picture that we have been painting with respect to the future of hydrogen. And we'll continue to work with our colleagues at Environment and Climate Change Canada and with the Canadian Energy Regulator.
Excellent, thank you. So I'd like to go back to Environment Canada again. What are some of the regulatory incentives for clean hydrogen? Can you describe those?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. So there are a range. Some of them I referenced in my opening statement, including the clean fuel regulations that were published in July 2022. And Natural Resources leads the work on the Complementary Clean Fuels Fund that was put in place to help incentivize clean fuels and technologies, including hydrogen. I also would highlight the role that carbon pollution pricing can play in this space, because it does create incentives for cleaner fuels and cleaner technologies. Those would be two things that I would highlight. There's also, members mentioned earlier, the work that is underway related to clean electricity and potentially the role that hydrogen will play around cleaning Canada's electricity grids over the coming decade. So those would be a couple of things that I would highlight. Thank you again for that question.
Thank you. And just a general question now. We're always curious, what are other countries doing with hydrogen? So Ms. Hogan, if you have an answer, we can turn to Mr. Hannaford.
I will happily defer this one over to John Hannaford. This is a very dynamic space that I know Mr. Hannaford has referenced a little bit already in his remarks today.
Yeah, it is a dynamic space. I mentioned the situation in Europe where they are looking at a whole series of applications of hydrogen and hydrogen generation as well. Asia is another area where there is very significant interest and very significant potential. So we've been in conversations with our friends in Korea and Japan about possibilities of hydrogen. There continues to be interest in that regard. And there's a series of investments being made in those jurisdictions with respect to the consumption of hydrogen and the sorts of applications that could be made in terms of energy generation and transportation and industry.
Well, thank you very much, and that's all for me, Chair.
Thank you very, very much. I want to thank everyone for coming in today. I appreciate the witnesses coming in as well in person. It's always great to see people back, and as well for committee members to be here on a Friday. With that, I will adjourn the meeting, and thank you again for your time, and have a good weekend.